Part 5. Chinese Demilitarized Zone. Talia was looking out at the blackness of night from the top of the ship hangar her family resided in. 20 years of lack of pollution had done Tianjin well. The skies were clear enough to see the stars. The water was somewhat drinkable, and children didn't develop tumors before they could walk. Still, as Talia looked east, she knew Tianjin was not home. It never would be. Her father shut down all talk of Japan every time she brought it up. History and culture are important, but we can never go back. Talia repeated his words under her breath. Ever since following the Crusaders, Talia had grown more inquisitive. Why couldn't they go back? What was so wrong with their home that they could not fix as they had here? Her questions fell on stubborn ears stuck in an old way of thinking. Revenge was still at the foremost of her people's minds. Revenge against the Chinese who had brought them here as slaves. It wasn't the same as Alexander's revolution. This was caught up in a blood feud that stretched back far before the war. Talia understood her people's feelings, but now she knew that she had been raised to feel that hatred. When she watched Morrison's tower fall, she saw the fury that brand of hatred brought. Talia couldn't escape fate. She knew it. This was her war. Alex, Janet, or Layla wouldn't falter as easily as she was doing now. She wanted to live up to their example. Their defiance in the face of odds stacked too high. She needed them now for reassurance that her people would finally be free, even if Talia no longer believed it herself. She used a hand to reach for the tags around her neck and read it aloud. The new name she had given herself was where her mind was now, but she wondered if taking down the Cloudbreaker reactor would yield a new feeling or drive her further into self-loathing. It was not an answer she could be sure of until her people had a home. She hoped that would clear these feelings. Mikhail and Layla took flight an hour after Alex and the rest of the team. Mikhail wanted to be sure the reactor would overload correctly and destroy the entire base. Layla wasn't sure how far along the Shadow's emotions had come since they had first met, but she could feel his regret as they hovered over Severnaya. That regret of losing home was something Layla knew all too well. "Are you sure you want to stay and watch?" she asked. "Yes, we must ensure it is destroyed," Mikhail replied. He was right, of course, but Layla thought that what he meant to say was, "I have to see the end of the place that has caused me so much pain." Layla hoped it would make Mikhail feel better, and that maybe Severnaya's ghosts could rest easier with that place destroyed. Nothing would be around to record its presence, except a square amount of yardage where the snow crunched a little more. The explosion was bright. Layla shielded her eyes while Mikhail simply shifted his to maintain his stare at the light. When it was over, nothing but scorched earth and refuse remained. The snow was quick to coat it and hide traces of old-world engineering. "Let us go," Mikhail said as he proceeded to sit behind her. "I am ready to leave this place behind." Layla punched forward on the throttle, and the two did just that. About an hour passed before the endless silence began to bother Layla. Alex would at least try to have a conversation, even if it was empty, but Mikhail just sat there, doing whatever it was he did in his head. "Hey, Mikhail, you awake?" The Shadow didn't respond. That made Layla sigh. She tried thinking back to Alonsfo's and the music that played there. She wished she was back there now instead of heading to another hell. "I am sorry, Layla. I was going through my research notes. I wanted to ensure all the progress I made at Severnaya was saved." "That's weird. You could just choose to leave off somewhere and go right back to it?" Layla asked. "Indeed. It is a human element to want to return to where you left off. I could go through it in the background while speaking with others, but that I believe would be rude." Layla thought about what he had said. Humans were stubborn like that, picking up where they left off regardless of what stopped them. It reminded her of what she and Alex went through to get back to New Purgatory. "Layla, may I ask you something?" "Anything." "It is of a personal nature, to you and Alexander. You two are in love?" Mikhail asked. Layla had to stifle a laugh. "I thought that was obvious to everyone. What brought this on?" Mikhail was silent for a few moments. She wondered what he was thinking, or if he was cursing himself for even asking. "The old man, as you call him. His gift for me was more personal than practical." "How's that?" Layla asked. "It was a memory from my past, about my wife." my family. It was a memory he was able to give back to me. I can remember them, Mikhail explained.
Was it like one of your flashbacks?
Yes. It brought me to a small church in a city far away from Severnaya. My wife, she was beautiful. It was one of the few memories that brought back emotion.
What was her name?
I do not know. I remember saying it in the flashback, but it is lost to me now. Nusa may have thought it was a gift, but now, as we sit here discussing it, I feel it is a cruel reminder of all I have lost. Layla regretted asking.
I'm sorry, Mikhail. I don't think Jack did it to hurt you. Maybe he thought it would help restore some of your memories. Or maybe it was a memory he thought you'd want, even if it hurt.
I had not thought about it that way. It makes me question the value humans put on emotion. To remember loss is unproductive, Mikhail replied.
You're human too, Mikhail, no matter what was done to you. And it's human to be curious. Your curiosity about your past led you to that memory. You're more like us than you give yourself credit for.
Mikhail said nothing, thinking about Layla's words. She didn't think she had upset him, but he was impossible to read.
You wanted to ask about Alex and I, yeah?
She said, breaking the silence between the two of them. Mikhail remained silent for a few more moments. I am attempting to come up with a question without it sounding too... he trailed.
Clinical? Scientific?
Layla said. Impersonal. You are both my friends. I do not want to use the wrong words.
That's the wonderful thing about friends, Mikhail. They like you for who you are and won't judge you for how you go about saying things. Just ask.
Do you believe you will marry him? Does your love for each other run that deep? The shadow asked. Layla smiled as she punched at a few controls and spun her chair around to face Mikhail.
In a way, I'd say we already are. I couldn't leave him any more than he could me. The fancy ring and ceremony were old world rules. We don't need that.
Mikhail nodded, his golden eyes shifting and closing. Would you take my advice if I gave it?
Of course.
I would advise you consider it. The ring may be materialistic and the ceremony ostentatious, but it will make a beautiful memory, one everyone would need in this darkness we face. You could say that it might provide hope, and I could think of no better providers than you and Alexander. Layla had not imagined it the way Mikhail had. Maybe it was the memories of his own wedding, or his wife that had brought this to the forefront of his mind. But Layla couldn't argue with his logic. Still, she never thought she would have a wedding, certainly not like the ones before the war.
You make a good point, Mikhail. I'd like to think that might be enough to pull us away from the fighting. It's wearisome. I want something more than aiming down the barrel of a gun. One day.
There will be an end for us all one day, Mikhail replied. I hope yours is peaceful, enjoying all that you have accomplished.
Thanks, Mikhail.
She knew his style of conversation was awkward, and his deadpan voice could make her shiver. But Layla had grown used to that in her time with him. She spun her chair around again. They were about to overtake Alex's bird.
Don't get there too fast,
Alex said over the comm. We might need you to watch our back in case we get into trouble.
That bird took a missile to the side and survived a crash landing. I think you'll live with a few machine gun marks,
Layla replied over the comm.
Not the bird I'm worried about, Alex replied. We'll see you in Tianjin. Copy that, Alex, Layla said.
Alex sighed. He hated being away from her, even if the bird was only a few 100 meters ahead. He was needy. He wanted her around. Alex would lie to himself and say it was to keep her safe, but the reality was that he felt safer when she was around.
Funny how that works, huh, tough guy?
He brought up a hand to his head and massaged his temples. Alex was running on less than 3 hours of sleep. That is, if tossing around on the hard metal floors of a hell chopper could be considered sleep. He wanted coffee, or that stupid sports drink powder. Anything to keep his eyes open through the rest of the night. The door to the cockpit opened behind him, and for a half moment he hoped it was one of Baruger's assassins. How could it be?
Figured you could use this.
Ferris placed a cup near the control console. Alex looked over at it. It wasn't coffee, but it was warm, watery, and probably had caffeine in it. Alex grabbed it and took a drink.
Thanks. What the hell is it? Tea, Shaylee replied. Have you ever had it before? Only when it's been made out of tree bark, flowers, or blades of grass, Alex said. That is disgusting. No, this is what the Maeve used to drink all the time. It was from an old storage unit we found in the city. Gotta love old storage units, Alex said between sips. Free furniture, cars, whatever the hell this is. Darjeeling, Shaylee answered. Alex looked up at her, his eyebrows raised. Well, that's what it said on the label anyways. Thanks, Alex said as he placed the mug back down. It's just what I needed. Right. Alex, let me ask you one thing? Alex heard her, but he didn't bother looking back. Sure, just as long as it's not about Layla, my dead friends, or the tower. Go ahead. Everything about Mikhail makes him seem like he's already dead. His skin, his voice. I mean, you never know it by the way he moves, but the most alive part about him is his eyes, Shaylee said. You were in the lab. You read what his own people did to him. That man is nearly triple our age and has more scars on his heart and mind than all the ones he hides under that skin suit. That's what I want to ask about, Shaylee said. You're better off asking him, but go ahead, Alex replied. Why do you trust him? Especially with Layla. He feels wrong. Everything that was done to him, everything he's done. I don't know, Alex. How can you be comfortable with him? I'm not sure what to tell you. He served with us and he proved himself trustworthy. I consider him a friend. Like most of my friends, he has issues. His are just a little bigger. I feel concerned with his sanity. He's a walking time bomb from the old world. If he keeps fiddling with his database by introducing emotions, it might break him. None of us will want to be around him if that happens. Shaylee, I get your concern, but you don't know him well. He's saner than when I met him, and that's saying a lot. Before, it seemed like he was just interested in killing. There's more to him now, Alex replied. I'm not sure I believe the research notes. Mikhail takes them as fact because he was created to absorb knowledge logically, but he's not a scientist, Shaylee explained. Meaning that report he keeps combing could be full of lies. Researchers used to do it to get more grants and funding. Old world military was no better. Oh, did the Maeve teach you that? Alex asked. Grow up, Alex. Or better yet, open a book on the old world. What are you saying? That he's faking everything he does around us? Why would he do that? Because his programming tells him to. Look, if the research notes are right, then he should have no emotions, no flashbacks. He shouldn't even be aware of his past life, let alone be chasing it. He believes they must have screwed up, otherwise he wouldn't feel the things he feels. Yes, but how much did they screw up? His mental state is unpredictable, and even if he does become Mikhail Koslov again, what will that cost? Alex had no defense for that. I don't know, but I trust him. That trust is all that matters to me. Instead of condemning him, how about you try helping him instead? Ferris had enough. Yeah, sure, fine. Enjoy your fucking tea. She stormed out of the cockpit, slamming the door behind her. Alex shrugged his shoulders and went for another sip of the tea. He wanted to spit it out. Too bitter. For Tyrese, it was fair to say he and Gajil had different outlooks on life. Though the two carried with them similar backgrounds and the need for survival, Tyrese reveled in tales and stories. Those made him feel alive and were the only recipe to not repeat the mistakes of the past. Gajil found joy in battle. He was born into bloodlust, the cracking of a skull here or the plunging of a spear there. A man can't sustain himself on battle forever, Tyrese said as he and Gajil shared some of the tea Ferris had made. That is why we die on a battlefield. If war no longer sustains you, then that is when your time ends. The place where you spent the most time. All your respect is measured by all the fights you've been in then? Tyrese asked. Gajil flashed him a wicked grin, the kind only murderers, serial killers, and tribals could give. It made Tyrese's spine rattle. No, my young friend, I am measured by the pints of blood I spill on the dusted ground. War will always be fought, but it is the warriors that must make them memorable. As a keeper of old knowledge, you must know this. Alex does all too well. Tyrese couldn't argue that point as much as he wanted to.
Killing Morrison would be remembered long after the two of them were dead, but the battle itself would be forgotten. But they would never forget the names of the street rebels and old soldiers that fought to bring that tyrant down.
You seem to know Alex before you met him.
I wanted to fight him, Gajil explained. The Maeve's consort did not explain who he was to me after I was spared. It's the way he walks, the way he carries himself. Alexander is a man who has lost much, but he presses on. It's as if a hurricane pushes against him everywhere he goes, and his allies are swept in with him. Janet likes to say it was his belief. Even when he doubted himself, he kept walking, like it was too late to turn around, and that doing so would mean death. She is correct in her idea. The only weakness in him is his ties to his friends, to us. We are the weight he carries.
You make it sound like we don't help him, Gajil.
Again, Gajil flashed his terrible grin. You misunderstand. He does not carry our weight in battle, but the weight of our lives. Every time he loses a friend, a piece of him dies too. I have felt this. It is another reason his stance is so heavy. He carries a burden of leadership. He chose that, Tyrese said. I do not agree. We do not choose what we become. We can only react. Pick up the gun, put it down, fight for blood, live as a historian. These were made from reactions. Alex chose leadership when he picked up a rifle and began to fight Morrison, Gajil, Tyrese tried to say politely. No. Leadership chose him when he picked up the rifle and reacted to his people being murdered. His reaction was to fight back. Leadership picked him when he reacted to war with war. You understand?
I understand, but I don't agree. We all have choices we make. I mean, he walked away for a little while.
For a while, certainly. But he came back, didn't he? War has chosen him. When John Morrison lay dead, there were no more conflicts. Unfortunately for Alex, Gajil trailed. War will never end. There'll always be another conflict, like there'll always be more history, like there'll always be another battle in the arena. Tyrese finished. It is how it must be.
You're actually saying once our way is set, we can't move past it?
Tyrese pressed. Choice is an illusion. Our reactions determine how we will act. You may go about keeping history in a book or on a computer. Alex may kill a man with his hands instead of a rifle, but those are minor details. The result is the same. It is what we are and what we are for. Choice is a cheap word that clouds our purpose.
You're forgetting one thing that clouds your own argument.
Fate. You believe in choice, but you also believe in fate, Tyrese? You that keeps history cannot be that foolish. Fate would assume Alex was always going to kill John Morrison and bring down his tower. No. It was uncertain, but he made sacrifices, endured loss. His reaction to Morrison's tactics, calling it fate, throws away the losses.
I don't know how you can believe such things with so much confidence,
Tyrese replied. I enjoy knowing how I have led this life. Whether it is true or not does not matter, but it does bring me comfort and peace. A final thought. If you believe fate and choice are truly connected, then why did John Morrison, a man with so much power, assets, and opportunity, not crush the Crusaders? Gajil said as he stood up. It is because his reaction was to be dismissive. That made him arrogant. It made him believe that he was not fated to die by the hand of a concrete warrior. And so in being dismissive, his final reaction was to fall. Tyrese watched Gajil move away to refill his teacup. Vixer and Gates opted to have their tea in one of the bunk rooms. They both had odd schedules of sleep in their lifestyles, which made it easy for them to get a bunk together when no one else was around. Keely had her feet hanging over a top bunk. Across from her, Sam sat on the lower bunk. He sipped the tea slowly, even though it was past the point of steaming. Vixer had inhaled hers and burned her tongue while doing it. "Don't like it?" she asked as she swung her legs back and forth.
"It's fine. I don't do well with caffeine."
Sam understood she was direct, but he was hoping she would avoid prodding that topic.
Why is that?
Vixer pressed. Yeah, you should have known better. Heart palpitations. Makes it hard to breathe, let alone run. Staying away from caffeine keeps me feeling right.
That doesn't sound normal. Maybe you should have that Ferris check you out.
Yeah, maybe, Gates replied shortly. Here, have the rest. He passed his cup over to her. You know, from the way he acts, you'd wonder if Alex was a leader at all. He doesn't match up to the man Tyrese portrays in the stories at all. Man hasn't said 2 words to me since that big meal.
Stories are just lies written by those who want to embolden their heroes. Besides, I never got to know all the men under my command, Vixer replied. Does that bother you?
It just doesn't match up for what I've been told.
Does it match up to what you've seen?
Gates thought about that for a moment. Alex had saved his life by nearly giving his own. He couldn't forget that. Well, he did give up a finger for me. There's that. Still, I wonder if the man I know is different than the man he was.
Yeah, maybe he isn't the same person I heard about in the old remnant camps, but he's lost a lot. No one is the same after walking off a battlefield. Never mind losing people. He's probably got a lot on his mind. We all should, Vixer explained.
Yeah, China doesn't sound like good business. Alex said it was going to be a suicide mission. That would be his and Layla's second. Has to do with the favor he owes those refugees. I want to know what that's all about. Gates sighed. Keely nodded her head at him.
What's the matter, Sam? She asked. Don't want to save the world?
You joke, but this sounds like fighting someone else's war.
It's what they're owed, Keely said. He saved your life and technically mine and my men. Don't get me wrong, I want to know what's going on too, but we're in too deep for second thoughts.
I suppose we'll find out soon enough. So, you want to join the others, or? Sam raised his eyebrows at her. Vixer crooked her neck.
Oh shit, she said. Here? Now?
The door opened before Gates could reply. Alex stood there with the mug. We're just shy a few hours out. I wanted to let you know, Alex said before he turned to leave, but Gates figured that now was as good as any for answers. Alex, hold up. China, what exactly is going on there? Why is it a suicide mission? Alex looked away and sipped from the mug. It's complicated. I'd rather tell everyone at the same time, and to be honest with you, I don't really have the words or the hours of sleep to tell you right now anyway. Honesty, Alex thought, all the while trying to keep the same words the old man would use out of his mouth. He knew he couldn't lie to these people whose lives he was putting at risk. That's why Jack drank, to ease himself into lying. I understand, Gates said. It's been a long haul. I think everyone's just a little on edge to find out what we're doing here. When we reach Tianjin, it'll all be clear, I promise, Alex said. Gates gave him a nod as Alex closed the door. Well, at least he didn't try to lie.
Like you said, he's worn out. We all are. I mean, either that or he's walking us into the mouth of hell and isn't ready to discuss it yet. We always heard bad shit about this place.
Gates sighed and then jumped up to Keely's bunk, wrapping an arm around her and trying to pull her down to the bed.
You pig, she said, pushing him off the bunk and to his feet. At least lock the fucking door first.
Layla recognized Tianjin's shattered coast. How could she forget? The last time she was here, she almost lost all that was important to her. Now she was wondering if that could all happen again. The sun was rising over the ocean. She found the familiar outcropping of hangars and set her bird down on the helipad atop of one, but left enough room for Alex. She and Mikhail didn't immediately exit. The other chopper was a few minutes behind, and there was no one around to greet them. They waited until the old bird came down. Alex let it hit the pad hard, either as a lack of experience or to knock on the door. Either way, they were not alone for long. Tandori Shazari, his daughter Talia, and a man none of them had met climbed through the hatch that led to the roof. Alex stepped in front of his team and extended a hand towards Tandori. Mr. Shazari, nice to see you again. Tandori smiled. Alexander, you have returned to us once more. I am happy you were able to see me this time. Alex nodded. You'll have to forgive me for missing you when we brought Talia home. After the tower went down, we needed a break from war. I was eager to get to it. I understand all too well, and I am sorry for the loss of Captain Newsom. Yeah, Alex replied. He's why I'm here. He told me of the deal he made with you. My team and I are here to honor that.
So you did receive my message,
Talia said aloud. Alex smiled. Yes, and it's good to see you again, Talia. Talia smiled back, but Alex saw something wrong in her eyes. They were almost dim compared to the bright fire he remembered when the two had met. Then Alex saw her catch a glimpse of his team, specifically Mikhail, and her expression changed. She was vibrant once more. Talia, her father said, pulling her from her thoughts, you had not told me that you sent for them.
I sent a message to let them know we were ready, Father. I knew they would not keep us waiting, and I missed the friends I made in my time with them.
Of course, Tandori said as he looked back at Alex and his team. Does your team know what this entails, Alex? About as much as I do. It's a suicide mission. I will say this, when you lay out the plan, the choice of whether they want to join is their own, but you have me regardless, Alex stated. That is acceptable. Believe me when I say I will take any aid I can get, especially under the circumstances. This was not your debt to pay, Tandori replied. Nor was my war yours, or your daughter's. You deserve better, and I choose to stand behind that cause, old man or no. Tandori nodded, and then looked surprised, as if he had forgotten something. In the back, Tyrese was looking over at Gajil. Choice, Tyrese whispered. The arena fighter's arms were crossed, but he did not turn towards the smaller man. Illusion, Gajil answered. Alex turned back to look at the exchange, but Tandori cut him off. This is Takeo. He has been helping us plan our attack, using our contacts inside the city. Alex extended his arm again and caught the tattoos that ran up and down Takeo's arms. They reminded him of Otto, and Talia's hatred for the markings on his skin. Welcome back to our city, Gaijin. Alex recognized the insult. This is China. We're all Gaijin here. In moments, Takeo's arm reached for the blade at the side of his belt, but Talia had already unsheathed her sword and slapped Takeo's arm against his side. Tandori yelled out something in Japanese at his daughter. She responded, and Takeo did the same. Tandori then responded slowly. After a few moments of tension, Talia placed her blade at her back, and Takeo let loose his grip on his sword. I apologize, Alex said. It's been a long trip, and I think we're all a little bit tired. Takeo said nothing. Tandori looked back at the Yakuza, his grimace scolding, then looked to Alexander. I understand. We can make accommodations for you and your team. We're comfortable up here, Tandori. I know room is probably scarce, Alex said, ignoring the dirty look Takeo was giving him. Very well, but please join me for my morning tea. We have plenty to discuss and plan, Tandori replied. Alex looked back and nodded at his team. Layla moved beside him. How was the flight? She asked. Well, no one died. Ferris might hate me a bit, though. She'll still stitch you up, Layla replied. Won't matter if she or anyone else doesn't help us, Alex whispered as they began their climb down the ladder. Takeo split off for the makeshift village the people had made in the hangars. Alex made sure to drop a few steps back from Tandori. They're here, aren't they? Layla said. They'll fight for you just like the old team. She had said that before, but this time Alex was struggling to believe it. He knew none of them were ready for the battle to come. They hadn't come to trust him yet. A few hours of loyalty in battle did not make a cohesive unit. It made him wish for Tyler or Elias, two men he had grown up with and knew he could trust with his life. The group stopped just outside of Tandori's office and on the outcropping that overlooked the village. Christ, Vixer said as she leaned on the railing. Just when you thought we had it bad. She was staring at the shanty homes made of rusted metal, the clothing lines that hung over and seeped water onto each of the huts, and the amount of mud and dust that kicked up into the air thicker than the smoke. Tyrese moved beside her. This makes home look like a vacation spot. Alex noticed that neither Gajil nor Gates looked particularly distressed by the village. He knew those men had survived and worse. He imagined that to Gates this was just another settlement in the lengthy line of settlements he had stopped to trade with. He guessed Gagio would have preferred to grow up here rather than with the tribals and the arenas. Ferris was too busy rummaging through her medical bags to pay attention to their surroundings, but Alex wasn't entirely sure what she might have been looking for. Something to help the locals, maybe. Tondori returned with a map, and Talia with a set of teacups for everyone there. One at a time, she filled up each cup as Tondori began to speak again. Come in, come in. Some of you may not know what it was my people were promised, by one whose name is better left in the grave he ended up in. Tondori rolled out the map on the table and used several stones to keep it flat. The team looked down at the map. It was of Beijing with several places marked. Only a few of the group understood what those markings meant. Alex reached for his rifle and pulled back the slide. A bullet flew in the air, which he caught and placed on the large red circle on the map. The plan is to destroy Beijing's Cloudbreaker reactor and take the entire city with it. Thomas Beruger watched his monitor intently. The worst had not yet happened. While the other nations had opposed him in Jerusalem, he had other means of fighting these Crusaders. With Morrison gone, power was eroding beneath him, and he could not allow that to happen. The peace he had built and sustained at home and beyond would not be destroyed by the whim of one petulant child and his group of misfits. Beruger wheeled his chair over to a new monitor and punched in a few commands. Soon, his newest soldiers would near perfection, and he could end Alexander Velasco. Once that was done, he could focus again on New Purgatory. Still, he wanted to gauge the interest of the other nations. Beruger put in a call to his Australian compatriots. The call rang and rang, but Beruger knew it was only a matter of time. An image of a man roughly in his 40s, with flat-top hair and a cleanly shaved face, appeared in front of him.
General Kale, still looking as steeled as ever, Beruger said.
What do you want, Doctor? The man replied.
Reassurance, General. The vote in Jerusalem has shaken my confidence in your nation's convictions to my goals. What's good for Berlin is good for us all. Yet many seem to be losing sight of that fact.
Your goals aren't my concern anymore, Thomas. Jerusalem had good reason to stand with you, but only because of what happened there. For us, change was needed. I abide by Lawson's decision.
And you didn't think to inform me? Even a brief discussion would have been welcome rather than being blindsided.
I don't answer to you, Thomas. Your technology might have saved my people, but that does not make us indebted to your vision of the future. A vision that is dubious at best. Our people saw what happened to John Morrison. He paid for his crimes when that tower crashed to the ground. That's not the future we want.
That did not stop you from aiding him. I'm sure your new allies would be pleased to know who killed one of their own.
The general shook his head. First you called me to ask for my help, and now you threaten me? They already knew, Thomas. How could they not? We helped New Purgatory at your request. That was to help keep the peace because we weren't sure who we were dealing with. But I loathed John Morrison. We knew everything he was doing to his people, and we stood by and watched where men like you and I should have stood up and said no more. Instead, we were happy to let him do what he willed, as long as it wasn't in our backyard.
John might have been foolish, but his father helped save your nation. Loyalty should mean something to you, Kale.
At one time it did, Woodson replied.
Kale, this is about more than good and bad men. This is about the fate of all nations in the Council. This is about the future. Are you so blinded by Morrison's actions that you cannot see that a man like that was required to keep the barbarians away?
The barbarians, as you put it, found a way to clear their names and put themselves on the council. They're rebuilding their city without slave labor and offering amnesty to those who choose it. It may not fit into your vision of progress, Thomas, but it's certainly cleaner.
So I have lost you then, my other oldest ally.
The balance of power is shifting. Suffice to say, we no longer need your brand of leadership. With New Purgatory on the council, you won't be able to invade them unless you swing that through a vote, which I assure you, you won't. Let us go. Go back to your lab and leave matters as state alone, Thomas. Beruger shook his head. He could feel rage bubbling up in his chest. All his work, all the scientific and political progress he had made was falling apart. All because his friend's stupid son had gone too far, murdered too many. Beruger thought himself brilliant at analyzing data, patterns, outcomes, but never did he imagine his greatest threat would come from street vermin playing would-be revolutionaries.
Very well, Kale. I see you will not budge in your convictions, but I will have you understand this. Those men and women are still terrorists, and they have turned New Purgatory into a rogue state, council-backed or not. You and the other nations may sit back, but I will not.
Meaning? Woodson asked.
Meaning that it would be best if your soldiers did not find themselves in New Purgatory any time soon.
Before Cale could respond, Beruger had hung up on him. He sat at the desk, waiting a few moments. He tapped his fingers on the table. A call came in for him. It was the general. Beruger brought up a separate phone system that led to his aide outside the lab.
Beatrix, please make any callers aware that I do not wish to be disturbed today. Thank you.
Beruger had plans to improve and rebuild the world, but it was all falling apart. So he fell back on a plan he knew all too well. As before the war, he wanted these allies afraid. Fear would bring them back for protection only he could give them, and failing that, he would show them the cost of not playing his game. Alex looked at his team. None of them looked afraid, upset, or otherwise disturbed by what he had just said. That surprised him. Or maybe they just have enough respect not to embarrass you in front of another leader. You must have some kind of plan in mind, Alex asked. Tondori shook his head.
Not a real one. Jack Newsom assumed that he could sneak inside alone and set off the reactor. I believe that plan to be foolish and rushed, though I doubt the man had any intention of surviving.
You'll get no argument here, Alex replied. What have their attacks been like? Tondori did not answer immediately, instead remembering the old man's words about what would happen when the reactor was nearing completion.
Limited. Our scouts and spies say they are consolidating soldiers in towns near our border, but the forces are limited. Most are back in Beijing to guard their new asset.
Alex looked over at Talia. This is your deal. I have ideas, but if you two have a way you want to do this. Talia held up a hand to stop him.
We would welcome any advice you have to offer, Alex.
He knew Talia was off, but he wanted to know why. There was something about her voice, her eyes, deference where there had been pride. Had it been the tower? Had it affected her as much as it had him? I'll take some time with my team to overview the map, but I should have some options available to you by tonight, Alex replied.
Then we will await you here until then,
Tondori said. Alex reached for the map and rolled it up. As he and his team followed, he saw that Talia had joined and kept up her stride with Mikhail. Shit, if only she knew.
It is good to see you again, Talia,
Mikhail said as he turned his head towards her.
I am happy you have remained alive.
Talia tried to take that as a compliment. She remembered once that Layla had compared the two of them, their unfeeling zeal and inability to see anything but the task in front of them. Mikhail could not feel emotions, but he at least tried to express them to Talia, even if they did come off awkward and cold. Being a Crusader had taught her more about life and people than she could ever have learned stuck in the hole that was Tianjin.
Thanks, Mikhail. I missed you, and everyone else, too.
You did not call me a demon, the shadow replied. Talia wore a lopsided half-smile.
You never were, and it was wrong of me to call you such. Faith was in control when I called you that, but I've set it aside.
The shadow tried to understand. He had found Talia interesting because she was directly enigmatic. She used her religion as a shield to guard her as a looking glass to view the world. She spoke with convictions that, in the grander portrait of life, meant little. No matter how many times Mikhail read on faith, religion, or zeal, he could never find a definition that fit his friend. He wondered if it was an ever-changing process that had no form. He could not know for sure, for he did not remember what having faith was like.
Faith is no longer in control?
Mikhail asked.
No, Talia replied. I am.
She reached into the neckline of her robes and fished out her dog tags. Then she reached for Mikhail's hand and brought it to the tag with her name. The shadow looked closely. She had carved out the laser etching with a small knife, and below read new letters that she had carved into the aluminum. Doubt. Mikhail let go of the tag and withdrew his arm. He hoped Talia was not expecting anything else. They had fallen behind from the main group. The rest were all up the ladder. The shadow was about to turn, but Talia hugged him. His arms fell by his side. He was unsure of what to do until he heard Talia whimpering softly into his shoulder. Mikhail brought his arms up around her and held her tight. He felt her warmth on his arms, and a strange sensation washed over him. For a moment, he remembered his old life, not as a flashback, but a strong memory brought on by her embrace. He felt like a protector. He felt like the old soldier that had fought for his country before his capture. He felt like Mikhail Andreevich Koslov. In that moment, the shadow died, the background noise of the database died, and he was reborn. When Talia stepped back, the sensation went away. Again, he was simply Mikhail, destroyer of the old world. Mikhail, soldier, shadow, science experiment. Talia could see that he looked more jarred than she had a few moments ago.
Mikhail, I'm sorry. I should not have.
The shadow raised a hand to stop her speech. His eyes were focused above her head, almost as if he was in a daze. He wanted so badly to understand what had just happened, to make that his reality. He started walking back towards the village instead of towards the ladder. Talia wanted to follow him, but thought it might only affect him more. She sighed and wiped away the tears that had fallen to her cheeks.
Is this what I want to fight for? Is this all worth it?
She whispered silently before climbing the ladder. Alex sat alone on the ramp of his bird. He stared down at the map of Beijing, planning a battle in a war he'd never fought in for a land that wasn't his own. It made it hard to find motivation, save for not getting himself or his team killed. We're repaying a debt. That means something to Talia. This is probably how she felt when she had to fight your battle. Alex tried to look at the major centers Tondori had circled. Aircraft hangars, barracks, and fueling stations. Fueling stations. That was all the inspiration Alex needed. It brought him back to New Purgatory. He reached for the journal in his coat and started scribbling down notes. He didn't stop until every thought was cleared out of his head and scrawled out onto a few pages. It looked sloppy, unlike his normal passages, but as he read and reread through it, he was happy. Just as he had closed it and begun folding up the map, Talia walked up to him. She had that same dead-eyed expression, but she still carried herself upright and strong. It was a subtle difference in her demeanor. Sorry I wasn't able to give you a better greeting, Alex said, pushing himself up and giving Talia a hug. She happily received.
It was fine. My father knows how to take control of a conversation,
Talia replied. Alex took a few steps back. Maybe it was the sun or the shadows cast by the hell chopper, but he hadn't noticed how red and welled up the skin around her eyes was.
Hey, are you all right?
Alex whispered, hoping the rest of the team wouldn't hear.
Have you been crying?
Talia was fighting hard to hold more tears back when she spoke again, but her voice broke.
I have a favor to ask. Your favor to me, Alex.
Talia brought a hand up to her face and looked down, trying to hide her eyes.
It's not the same as what you will do for my father.
Alex didn't understand, but would figure that out later.
Yeah, Talia, anything. You took Layla home once. I need you to do the same for me. And I need you to do it now.
Home, Alex said quietly. This is your home.
No, it is not.
Layla, as if on hearing her voice, walked over to the two from up in the cockpit.
Japan, she said. She needs to see it, just like I needed to see London.
Alex nodded at her. Now wasn't the time to chase ghosts, but if he had done it for his girl, then he would do it for his friends too.
I'll keep the team in line, Alex. Take the Silver Angel,
Layla said. What about her dad?
I'll tell him you're doing some advanced scouting. Go on. It'll be fine,
Layla answered. Talia didn't need to hear any more. She made for the silver hell chopper while Alex stood in front of Layla. He was confused and let out a long sigh. He pulled a cigarette from his pack and put it up to his lips. You ever wonder if the people that died that night were better off? Layla's eyes grew wide and angry. She slapped him across the face. Alex's head went sideways and the cig dropped from his mouth. He could taste blood from his bottom lip. It was reactionary. Alex raised his head back up but didn't look at Layla. Instead, he kept his head turned and ran a hand through his hair. Layla never took her eyes off him, but now she realized what she had done. The travel, the battles, the politics. It was eating away at her now, too. She tried to soften her eyes.
Alex, never say that again, she said. They died so we could live. Don't you ever forget that.
Alex didn't look at her. He had been careless with his words. Sacrifice was a pillar of selflessness that they both knew well. Layla's own family sacrificed themselves to save her.
This isn't an easy road to walk. I'm sorry I said that,
Alex said, finally looking up at her. Layla gave him a faint smile and raised her hand to hold the side of his face she had slapped.
Well, no one said it was going to be easy, love. I feel like I'm falling apart too. But we'll keep going. This is what we do, yeah?
Alex reached up and grabbed her hand and squeezed it.
Even in my worst moments, you bring me back,
Alex said. Layla gave him a nod, came in close, and gave him a kiss on the cheek.
Go, love. Take her home like you did for me. She needs it, and it might help you too. Remind you why we're here, why we're fighting.
Alex smiled, returned her kiss, and then strode past her for the Silver Angel. Mikhail felt like his vision was going white, but he had to keep moving, one step after another. The feeling would shake off and he'd be normal again. When he looked around, he didn't see the faces of Japanese refugees. He saw his fellow prisoners, the snow of Severnaya, and then he was at Moscow in marching formation. He tried shifting his vision, but his eyes kept the same colorful world. No heat detection, no night vision, no X-ray sight. His mind was inflamed with headache, the stabbing of needles and fire all at once. A civil war was being raged with the database in his brain. The shadow could feel the earth under his knees. He must have fallen. How could this happen now? What was happening now?
My head, it's empty.
The pain, at least for now, subsided, and his body felt sore and frail.
Where the hell am I?
Mikhail forced himself back up and looked around his surroundings. He was outside of the hangar that belonged to the Japanese. The prisoners, the snow, and the red square were all gone. He had known that all along, but now his memory of coming to China felt distant.
But we just got here, didn't we?
Didn't, he said to himself.
Did we not?
He had used a contraction. The database rarely slipped and let him use contractions.
Why is that strange? I do it all the time. No, you do not.
This is Tianjin, he said louder, and I am Mikhail Andreevich Koslov. His memories all at once flooded back to him, serving in the wars, his beautiful wife and their children.
And this is what was done to me, and everything I've done since.
He was unsure how Talia had done this, but he felt whole. He could breathe and enjoy the crisp taste of air. He could feel the aches and pains in his knees and calves as he walked away from the hangar and towards the ocean. When he looked out at the vast expanse of water, the database did not feed him information about the temperature, the history, or what great battles had been fought on it. He had the freedom to see it his own way. Beautiful. The early afternoon sun shined down on him, its warmth on his skin. Mikhail peered down at the water by his feet. Oh, how he had scarred, wrinkled, and aged. The young man that joined the Russian military was gone. All that was left was him.
How old must I be? How long did this machine keep me from feeling my age?
He had been born in 1974. It was 2037.
Fucking Christ,
he said aloud.
How the hell am I still alive?
Mikhail wished he could fall into the ocean right there and let the waves take him. Everything about him had changed except his eerie eyes.
They were blue once. Never again,
he said to himself. That small loss was nothing compared to the revelation of losing his abilities. He might have been an experienced soldier, but he could no longer ignore pain.
Forget taking a bullet. I can't move without my body wanting to collapse. My wife. Her name was Maya. Maya Orlov, but she would become Maya Koslov. What happened to her? Did I kill her?
He reached up to rub his temples, but before his hand even touched his face, he felt his body hit the ground and waves lapping against his head. Darkness followed. Alex hated being back up in the air after landing in Tianjin not more than 6 hours ago. Still, he had to admit that even he was curious as to how Japan looked. From afar, the islands looked green and hazed from the fog ahead of them. He knew that they had been decimated by the war, and nature wouldn't take long to reclaim the broken island. 20 years is a long time to rebuild. Someone must have survived down there. As the bird approached the mainland, Alex looked down at the interactive map on one of his view screens. "Hey, Talia," Alex called out. "Come up here." Talia strode over to Alex's side. "Where are you from?" he asked, pointing a finger towards the map.
"Tokyo,"
she replied, giving Alex a direct line across from Tianjin to the city she was from. "Elias mentioned that place once. He used to read everything he got his hands on," Alex noted. Talia nodded, even though Alex couldn't see. She was more focused on the fog rolling into the mountains from the ocean.
"I wish I had met him."
Shit, I forgot. Alex was having trouble remembering who met who and when. Not that it mattered now with most of them dead.
"It was only a few months ago. How the hell did I—" "Can you tell me about him? Janet mentioned you two were good friends,"
Talia said. "We were like brothers. We met in New Purgatory as teens. We found the same flophouse to crash in one night after a massive uprising on the outskirts of New Purgatory."
"Did you fight in it?"
Alex shook his head. "No, we didn't even know how to use guns back then. We talked about what we saw, exchanged survival tips. I thought I'd never see him again, but he kept telling me these incredible stories."
"And here I thought you were the storyteller,"
Talia said. "I might be, but if I am, it's because Elias brought that out of me. He could tell the stories I wrote in far better detail, but I was good at putting them down on paper. Eli had a way of seeing things in his mind, a pursuit of knowledge so ingrained I'm not sure I'll ever understand. He didn't let fear of failure or judgments dictate his life."
"Was he from New Purgatory?"
"Born and raised. He was from what they used to call Brooklyn. He always said his first memory from before the war was walking down the streets and hearing music being played from so many different directions that it was hard to focus."
"It must have been hard for him to adjust after the war. His life changed dramatically,"
Talia noted. "You'd think so, but no. He was a street kid, homeless with no parents. Eli survived the same way he had before the war, eating shit people threw away, sleeping in abandoned housing. He was just trying to make it to the next day. He lived minute to minute." That surprised Talia. She had thought her companions had been born into simple lives that had been cast into fire, but Elias's life nearly mirrored her own.
"It is stories like these that make me wonder how I used to be so sure about my path. I felt that I knew everything, and now I know nothing."
Alex kept silent. He had no answers. His life was living one battle to the next and funneling emotion into his journals to avoid handling the stress of thinking about what he did.
"My faith has been changed in such a brief time, Alexander. After the tower, I questioned who I am, what I am for. I cannot simply be a weapon for my people, with my belief used to sharpen my edges."
"I don't know if I have any answers, Talia. This isn't the fight I started or the one I expected, but here I am knee-deep in it. Every day I wonder how it'll all play out or who I might lose. When you do that, it feels like you're losing the ambitions that made you pick up the gun to begin with," Alex explained.
"Or the sword."
Alex chuckled at that. "Yeah, that too." He checked the chronometer. "Chances are we'll be there in the middle of the day. The fog should burn off by then, and we'll get a clear view of the city. Do you know exactly where I should go?" Talia thought about that for a few moments.
"The tallest building that still stands. I want to see the memory my people have been fighting for."
Alex had been wrong. The fog was still coming in strong from the other side of the island. He was amazed by the stretch of land coated in buildings, or what used to be buildings. It reminded him of London, except the devastation here was not comparable to the English city.
"It's all so intact,"
Talia said in a confused tone. All of the buildings seemed to have some measure of structure. Not at all the junkyard Tianjin was. Sure, most of the glass was blown out of the old skyscrapers, and greenery grew over each building like ivy on a wall, but none of it was unsalvageable.
"I don't understand. This goes against everything I've ever been told. Tianjin looks like a refuse pile compared to this place.
No offense, Talia, but Tianjin is a refuse pile, Alex said. Levity would not work on her now.
There, bring me down on that building,
Talia said. Alex saw it. There was a decent-sized helipad on top and plenty of green. He wasn't sure what it was until he got closer. Foliage, he said to himself. Nature is taking this place back. Alex brought the hellchopper down slowly until he felt the landing struts hit the pad. Then he popped open the rear hatch, grabbing his coat from its draping at the back of his chair. Let's go have a look, Alex said. Talia wrapped her robes around her body tightly, but left her blade behind. She would not need it here. Not for what she had to see. The two looked off the building. The fog was clear enough to see all the tightly packed buildings below, and the Pacific out to the east. The docks were still in place, and there were old cargo ships that had been washed up on the piers, but there were no craters where bombs should have fallen. I'm not sure I understand it either, Talia, Alex finally said, breaking the long silence between the two. This is where your family was from?
Yes. How much do you know of our history?
Alex shrugged. Not much. I just know a lot of you tried to move to the islands near China before the war.
Some of my people immigrated to Senkaku when our reactors first began dumping radiation into the ocean. The first was from an accident, but the others were due to sabotage.
Who do you think did it?
That answer, if it was ever truly known, has been lost to time. But Senkaku would never hold all our people. Those islands are too small, so they fled in all directions. For us, it was to an all too familiar enemy.
China, Alex stated.
Yes, and Senkaku's proximity to our enemy and their enslavement of us after the war points the sword in a single direction. The sabotage is likely their work.
Alex gave her a nod. If this place was a hotbed, then they couldn't be here long. They might have exposed themselves too much already. He looked at the dials back aboard the bird. Talia, the Geiger counter is calm. If there's any radiation here, at least in this spot, it's minimal at best. Talia turned her head swiftly in his direction. Her expression was incredulous.
That doesn't make sense. If that is the case, then this is not my home. It doesn't match the stories we tell.
Maybe the old reactor's finally burnt out, Talia. The maps don't lie. This is Japan. I'm no scientist, but something has clearly changed. What puzzled Alex was why her people were fighting the Chinese over dead land. He didn't get it, but when he looked at Talia, her face told a different story. She closed her eyes and breathed in the chilly air.
Old hatreds,
she finally said, after exhaling.
Blood feuds, revenge, following the same path as the people had before the war. That's why my father has remained in Tianjin. It will lead us to ruin just as it did before the war.
Sometimes I wonder if I'm following that same path, Talia. How the hell do you stop war with more war?
I can only say this, Alex. After my time with you and the other Crusaders, I have found that war is neither eloquent nor joyous. I know now that I was not chosen but used as a tool by my father and by my people. I was led to believe I was fighting for all this.
She extended her arms out wide, encompassing all Japan.
Instead, I have been fighting a war that holds no meaning for me. We're not fighting for this place. We're fighting to exterminate vermin out of revenge. Instead of retaking our rightful home. It took fighting with and for people I care about to realize that. I have lost meaning without my friends.
Alex walked near the edge of the building as Talia spoke, and dangled his legs over the side. Small pink flowers grew tall and proud next to him, defiance in the face of destruction. As Alex looked over the edge, he saw that they grew all the way down the building and started at a tree that had grown through the concrete. Alex picked one and motioned for Talia to join him. She sat down at his side, and Alex gave her the flower. Ending this war isn't what you want? He asked.
I will end it for my people and my father. Then I will turn away from them forever and return with you to New Purgatory. There I will have purpose, for it is there I have found a new life. If they wish to return here, then that is their prerogative.
Alex turned his head towards her.
Are you sure? This thing we're doing for your father is bloody, but it's gonna get worse back in New Purgatory. Even with all the political ties and respect we've earned, I'm not sure it'll be enough.
Talia stood up and offered her hand to Alex.
If we finish this for my father, then I will follow you to the end of the earth, Alexander. You, Layla, Mikhail, Janet, you are all my friends, my family. I would fight, bleed, and die for you. I refuse to fight and die for empty promises, for lies. In you I have family. I have a home.
Alex took her hand and gave a last look at the horizon that was Japan. When this blood feud is over, I hope your people won't stay in China. This land is beautiful, safe and distant from the worries of the rest of the world.
And it is our home. Perhaps they will, Alexander, but that will be their choice, not mine.
The two turned back towards the hell chopper and watched the afternoon go by. When Talia had enough, Alex turned over the bird's engine and they made back for Tianjin. Mikhail woke up in front of a fire with fish cooking on a spit. The strange pain he had experienced earlier was gone, and the database was at the forefront of his brain again.
The memories, everything gone again.
It was a strange sensation to know you had experienced your past, but you were unable to remember what those experiences contained. He could remember what he remembered, but not the details. To Mikhail, it was like looking at a photograph with everyone's faces blurred out, or eating a splendid-looking meal without taste buds.
Glad you woke up, Gaijin. You've been sleeping on the beach for hours. It's an effective way to catch a cold or get poisoned.
Poisoned? Mikhail repeated.
Yes, the water here is still toxic, is it not? Mostly. I am Takeo Kaiji.
The man did not extend his hand. Instead, he rotated the spit, revealing one of his heavily tattooed arms.
Yes, I remember. You are the Yakuza,
Mikhail stated.
Yes, the label I'll never shake off, even if there is no such thing anymore,
Takeo replied.
Why did you gather me from the beach? You seem to dislike outsiders such as myself. Your life was worth the question I want to ask. Talia, does she love you?
Mikhail, though rarely taken aback, found himself annoyed by the question.
She would know the answer. It is no concern of mine.
Takeo shook his head. He was certain Mikhail was lying, but those eyes of his didn't confirm it one way or another. Mikhail, on the other hand, wondered if Takeo was jealous of him.
I could ask her for you if you wish, Mikhail suggested.
That had been the wrong thing to say. Takeo reached for his katana and stood up.
Are you challenging me, Gaijin?
Mikhail dropped back into his old assassination protocols.
Fighting you would be no challenge, Yakuza. Do you want to die on the eve of your people's greatest victory?
Takeo seemed to consider that, but Mikhail was curious as to the man's ability. He wanted to test himself against more than gun-wielding children. The battle would be a welcome break from the past few confusing hours. Mikhail sized up Takeo. The man didn't wear the armor Talia hid under her robes, and getting around his blade was a simple matter of catching him off balance. The Yakuza tilted his blade towards Mikhail and flashed a smile that reminded the shadow of the smiles Jack Newsom would give. Then Takeo tilted his blade down towards the ground.
I see why she admires you, Russian. You show no fear, not even faced with death itself.
Is the edge on your tongue sharper than the one on your blade, Takeo? Mikhail replied.
Would you care to find out?
Mikhail decided to let the man win with words. An argument did not matter. He was not there to create trouble, he simply shook his head.
I need to find my team, unless you brought me here for any other reason than a verbal scuffle. Thank you for making sure I did not drown. I like to know what our potential future enemies are made of,
Takeo replied.
Well, then you have little to fear of me, but your enemies would do best to remain wary of you,
Mikhail mocked. As Mikhail began to walk away, Takeo shouted at him.
We are not conquerors. We do what we must to protect ourselves. Defenders and conquerors are interchangeable terms when the defender initiates threats.
Mikhail made sure to say it loud enough so Takeo would hear, and then continued back to the hell choppers. I don't know, Alex. It's dangerous. You're talking about the heart of Beijing here, Vixer, ever the captain at heart, said after Alex laid out his plans.
Look, any way we come at this, it's going to be bloody. We might as well take the path that'll catch the Chinese by surprise. We get them off their guard and buy the second team time. Gagio was nodding. He preferred the direct approach. Tyrese was comparing Alex's plan to the approach the Crusaders had taken against Morrison.
I assume you already have the teams picked out?
Shaley asked. Yeah, when Tondori gets here, I'll lay the rest out. But we can do this if the timing is perfect, Alex replied. Layla had heard that before. The last time the timing needed to be perfect, they had lost most of their friends. It was as dangerous a proposition then as it was now. Saying it wouldn't help the situation. They were in too deep to walk away now. That didn't stop Layla wishing for the days when they no longer needed to run into the fire, when they could just be.
One day it'll change. I know it will.
As if on cue, Tondori and his daughter appeared from the rooftop hatch.
This would be much easier if you had set up the map in my office, Tondori said as he held down one corner from the morning wind.
Alex ignored him and placed his pen down on 2 spots on the map, followed by a rock where the Cloudbreaker reactor was.
Notice anything about these positions, Ton?
Alex asked while Gates came over to hold the corners for him.
Fueling stations, nothing extravagant, but new. And all connected to the reactor underground, Alex added. They're so busy trying to get stations stemming from the main power source that they haven't routed through intermediary underground stations like a new purgatory.
Layla's eyes lit up, as did Talia's. They remembered the fueling station hit job. Tondori stood up straight as he crossed his arms and tilted his head to the side.
Are you planning to infiltrate via the tunnels? They'll know that's what you're doing after the landing, and you disappear from the fueling station.
Alex grinned.
Yes, they would. Unless we made them think that we weren't that brazen, and instead we were just terrorists trying to blow up a gas station. You're going to leave a team behind as a distraction, Talia said slowly, her eyes dimming.
It's the only way. If we all go, we could get trapped down in the tunnels, Alex replied.
The tunnel team will have to move fast, because Topside will be sabotaging the station. If they're not quick, there won't be any tunnel left. That should throw the Chinese off to what's really going on. Meanwhile, the Topside team will fight off the incursion long enough for Tunnel to do their job at the reactor.
Tondori shook his head.
Do you even know how to sabotage the reactor?
Mikhail is all we need. He could bypass the reactor's security and disarm the safeguards. The result will be a large-scale bomb if I have all the details down right. Meanwhile, Topside team will move from one station to another, bringing them down and slowing the Chinese.
Some of them anyway, Layla added. We have to hope they don't get ahead of us or get wise to the real plan.
Then we're all dead, Shaley muttered. Tondori was pinching his bottom lip with his thumb and index finger and weighing the options in his head.
What of extraction? It's hard enough to retrieve one team, but 2? It'll be made more difficult by it being an active firefight.
Alex didn't have a solid answer to that. He didn't even know who would pilot the bird. He needed everyone on the ground. The new bird we picked up is fast enough to escape the anti-air they've set up, and it's armed well enough for stragglers. The only problem is finding a pilot. I need all my people with me, Ton, or this doesn't work.
How do you have the teams divided now?
Tondori asked. Me, Gagiel, Vixer, and Gates topside. Layla, Mikhail, Ferris, and Tyrese in the tunnels. It was news to the rest of the team, but Alex saw no surprised stares. It was a good distribution of stealth and might.
You're not leaving me out of this, Talia cut in. This is my battle, Alex. Let me go instead of Layla. She can pilot the bird better than anyone else here.
Wait a second, I don't get a say in this? Layla protested, visibly upset.
Layla, it is my fight, Talia pleaded. Please.
Alex knew Talia was lying. It wasn't a fight she wanted, and she had made that abundantly clear. Whether she was trying to save Layla or impress her father, though, Alex could not tell. He turned his head towards Layla.
We need a pilot, but I'll find someone else if you want to go with him, he said.
Layla shook her head. She wanted to fight. She always felt the need to prove herself to the rest of the team, that she was a fighter, not just a pretty face that was held back by her boyfriend.
You assaulted the tower and lived. You have nothing to prove. If you want to be there for them, this is the best way. You're the only chance of them getting out of there safely. I'm sorry, Talia. You're right, Layla said, fighting back the venom she so wanted to put into her voice. I'll fly the bird.
and try to keep topside covered. What about my people? Tondori asked. They are ready to give their lives for this fight. No, Alex said. No more of your people's blood is going to be spilled. This is a favor we owe to you, Tondori, and we'll pay it back, even if it means our own deaths. Tondori was taken aback, but pleased. Alex could see that more than anything, the man had wanted his own people to turn the tide of their blood feud. Then Jack Newsom came along and gave Tondori the keys, and with it, a debt that included the drivers. I need a minute with you, though, Ton. Alone. Gates rolled up the map and the rest of the team made for the Hellchopper, including Talia. Now Alex and Tondori stood across from each other at the table while the sun touched the middle of the sky. I hate to do this, but I'm going to need a favor from you, Tondori. But in the long run, it's going to be better for your people. Alex started. You're paying off a favor to me now, but I will hear what you have to ask. What I'm doing for you is going to be paid in blood. What I'm asking of you is simple by comparison. Very well, Tondori said and crossed his arms. Move your people back to your homeland when the debt is settled. Find a tanker that you can still use and go back to Tokyo. Your people will never be Japanese while they're born on the shore of your enemies. Tondori's normal calm had been replaced by anger, venting from his eyes and the hard creases on his face. Our land was torn apart before the war. There is no going back now. The radiation alone is gone, Alex interrupted. I've been there, Tondori. The infrastructure is still in place, save a few areas. Whatever lingered there before the war was snuffed out. Your people need to remember what they're fighting for, not who they're fighting against. Tondori's anger turned to shame, and he stared down at his boots. This war we wage, it's greater than my home. You who have never seen the mines, never toiled under the thumb of those who hate us because they were born, could never understand that. So you'd live atop their graves, in a land that would only bring back that memory of hardship? Alex asked. We would never forget it, Alex. You should not be questioning me on this. You live in New Purgatory. You understand better than me what it means to conquer tyranny, to take what isn't yours forcibly. The blood we spill paints this land a new color. It rewrites borders and erases history. A history my people would change. Oh, I know, Tondori. I know what changes hate brings. And I know how much I had to escape it once it was over. I can never look at New Purgatory the same way again. I should have stayed away. I should have hidden away in California and let those better suited to leadership do what they had to. You might not understand those words now, but I promise you that once China is nothing more than a place on a map and a crater in the earth, you will understand. You'll want to run. The difference is you have a place to go and people who will support you. A generation who has never seen the place you once called home, including your own daughter. Tondori raised his head and met eyes with Alex, but Alex immediately turned his back to him. He didn't want to hear the rationalization Tondori had. He had heard and seen enough already. Talia's upbringing in war was first-hand evidence. It's time for change, Tondori. With that, Alex walked away. The day went by too fast after the meeting. Gates was stringing up a few arrows using shards of metal he had traded for in the camps. Vixer was busy cleaning and polishing everyone's weapons next to him. Sam had never been a soldier, but often met those who were, or claimed to be. They always spoke of the in-between time, the hours of sheer boredom, followed by several seconds of terror and fighting for survival. It was rinse and repeat. You enjoy doing all that? He asked as he set one of his arrows aside. Not really, but it's something to do, Vixer said curtly. Do you enjoy constantly making ammo you'll never use again? Gates let out a small chuckle. Seeing as I hate pulling guns apart, yeah, I guess I do. Vixer shook her head. Though their time together had been brief, she had enjoyed every moment she spent with Sam. She thought he was charming, funny, and unafraid, or at least oblivious to the dangers their world presented. You and Gajil have that same stare, she said. Gates didn't bother bullshitting. He knew what she was talking about. Be it the wastes or the jungle, the world has a way of chewing off the fat. How tough you are depends on whether you're spit up or swallowed. Gross. You know what I mean. Vixer didn't,
Had it not been for the news and the small amount of traveling she had done as a Marine, then she wouldn't have known a war happened. Places like Tianjin were frightening. This was the world now, in all its annihilated glory. Maybe I would have if my life had been different. Are you ready for tomorrow? Keeley asked. Gates shrugged and reached for another piece of metal to fashion. Fighting a war is new to me. I'm nervous, but that means I'm as ready as I'll ever be. What about you? I'm ready to get back to using a goddamn gun, Vixer said, pulling back the rack on her own rifle. Shit. I'm glad you're on my team then, Gates said. You better be, Vixer replied as she reached down for another gun to clean. Gates didn't return to restringing his arrows. It was a serious question, Keeley. Vixer didn't bother looking up. Instead, she started tearing apart the rifle she had grabbed. This one was Alex's. It was caked in sand, grime, and grease. It made Keeley wonder if the man had ever been trained in maintaining weaponry, or if he got into fights so much that it didn't matter what level of maintenance he did to it. Was this the same gun he had used in the tower? Keeley, Gates pressed. When I was still a grunt, I used to relish the opportunity to fight. I didn't understand what had happened to the rest of the world, and my parents had done well at preparing me for a life in the military. My first firefight didn't mirror the experience of the other privates. I enjoyed it. Back then, all I thought was that I was fighting against criminals, gangs, and murderers. I didn't feel guilty about killing them. All I felt was euphoric, even though my life was on the line. War, battle, conflict, whatever people call it, it's never bothered me. What bothers me is waiting for it to happen. Too much talking or too much planning. That's why I was surprised when I was made captain. My CO said it had to do with me having no fear of battle. I was an example to the soldiers around me. So to answer your question, Sam, I'm not nervous. I'm not excited. I'm ready to do what I was raised to do. The only skill I have in this life. I'm ready to kill or be killed, and I'm ready to do it to an enemy that deserves it. It's atonement for all the shit I did without thinking. Now my eyes are open. Keeley never looked up. She just kept cleaning Alex's rifle while Gates sat enthralled by what he had heard. Instead of keeping the conversation going, he just nodded to himself and thought about her words. All the while, he wondered if that was how he would get after enough time in battle. Ferris was checking Mikhail's vitals. After what he described as an interesting evening, Shaley wanted to make sure he wasn't suffering any ill effects. I do not believe this is necessary, Shaley. My diagnostics... Yeah, tell me again. I'm still going to check everything, Mikhail. From what she could tell, Mikhail's only physical abnormalities were the scars on his body and the color of his eyes. His blood results were clean, yet she could not place his blood type. The shadow was unlike any person she had ever examined. Mikhail's responses and reflexes were sharp. She didn't bother to test his vision. His eyes darted to her hands each time she reached for a new utensil. Nervous around doctors? Shaley asked as she measured his heartbeat. Doctors and scientists turned me into what I am. Forgive me. I've only recently been able to show physical revulsion. It's one of those responses I wish to still hide. Ferris hadn't known Mikhail for long, but she did know he didn't feel fear. He could express it as a means of intimidation, but he had no reason to do that to her. It also bothered her that the rest of his body was calm, yet his eyes were mobile. Shaley pulled away from him. Well, despite everything, you seem healthy. How are you feeling? You seem jumpy. Mikhail's eyes calmed down. He shifted his vision a few times like he was doing another diagnostic, or something else Shaley could only guess at. All of a sudden, I feel much better. Thank you, Shaley. Something's wrong here. No problem. I'll see you back on the bird. Mikhail nodded once and left. Ferris couldn't place it, not without evidence, but now she had reason to dig deeper into the Shadow's files. She had made a backup copy of all she had found back at Severnaya without telling anyone. It might have meant the end of her life. The whole point of turning Severnaya into a pile of refuse to be covered by snow was to erase its past. I know better than that. History isn't just erased because a few people will it. Besides, if I can find out what went wrong with him, then I can prevent it from happening again in the future. I hope. Shaylee had taken a portable laptop from the Severnaya base. Keeping it charged had proven to be a pain, but she had Gates splice a few wires into a makeshift converter so she could draw power from almost any device, including the Hellchopper. She opened the laptop and began going through each of the files. Some she had already read, others were guesswork she skipped over. Dosages, experiments with pain, and further tests done after Mikhail had become the Shadow. There were only a few tests done in the aftermath, though. The scientists' notes made them seem happy that they had achieved their goal. Further results weren't needed. They assumed they could get rid of him if they had to. The scientists weren't looking towards the future, only the weapon they had created. Shaylee let out a sigh. Compared to the other books on scientific theories she had scavenged in Egypt, the Russians seemed like vain, brutish people with tools that overextended their grasp on reality. They had no concept of what they created. A monster, and a perfect soldier that would outlive them all. Shaylee closed her laptop. She was back to where she began. She wondered if maybe there was little she could understand. The man felt no pain, but for some reason had begun to feel emotion. A failing in the programming perhaps, but it made her sick that other parts of Mikhail might fail as well, be it his so-called immortality or his sanity. Talia found herself back in the village looking for Takeo. He had been absent from the meeting and she wanted to know why. His tent was empty and his fire was put out. That made her curious. He had been one of the more vocal voices in leading an assault against Beijing. Talia stopped rummaging around Takeo's tent when she heard footsteps drawing closer to her. When she turned, she saw it was Layla. "Takeo," Talia said. "It seems he has left us. No note, nothing. I don't understand." She continued her search, but all the while thought good riddance. "Why are you here, Layla?" "We're getting all the pre-flight checks finished. We'll be ready to leave at about 6 in the morning." Talia stood up straight and gave up on her search. "What time is it now?" "About 3, Layla replied. "You should get your things and catch a few hours." Talia nodded at her. "Thank you for warning me." Layla started to leave, but Talia came out of her tent and caught up to her. "Layla," she said, moving in front of her. "I wanted to thank you for letting me fight. I know it is difficult to stand off to the side, especially when—" "Don't say it," Layla cut her off. "This is your fight, and we need everyone where they're strongest, right?" "I'm fine with it." Talia smiled. "Okay. You know, Alex told me you changed your tag. Why?" Talia had a small laugh to herself and locked eyes with her friend. "Fighting your battle and seeing those close to us die shook away my belief that my skill meant I could never die in battle. We saw the best of us die on a whim because of mistakes and bad odds. You could say the pretentiousness of my faith has become the reason of my doubt." Layla smiled back at Talia. "This suits you better than the Holy Warrior title ever did." The two continued talking as they made their way back to the Hellchoppers. Layla didn't have to think about how their relationship had gone from hatred to friendship. It had been forged in war, and that bond it created could never be broken. After Alex finished his pre-flight checks, he went out into the night sky for a smoke. He found Tyrese scribbling again with no light in that old art book. "What are you sketching this time?" Alex asked as he took a long drag from his cigarette. "The end," Tyrese replied. "All this. There's not much to it, but it still has a heartbeat." Alex looked around. The fog made it impossible to see much beyond the building they were standing on. "And we're about to rip it out. Can't say that I'm all that disappointed to see it go," Alex replied. Tyrese stopped drawing and looked up. "You don't really mean that, do you?" His expression was serious. Alex felt bad. Tyrese reminded him of himself, though maybe a younger version, less jaded. It seemed like the man was trying hard to like him, too. Alex knew that he wasn't the hero Janet had probably made him out to be. This was war. There was no time for shining armor, speeches, and useless ideals. Morrison's Tower had taught him that. Blood, bullets, brutality. That's all they had left. "Yeah, Vale, I do. Talia's people deserve their freedom, and I owe them that favor." Tyrese shook his head. "The freedom bit I buy, but you know damn well that wasn't your favor to owe. That died when Jack Newsom did, so why are we here?
Japan's vote helps, but you're right to assume there's more to it than that. Did Janet ever tell you about Elias? Tyrese looked back to his sketchpad. He was brought up, but never in any detail. She told me he would have preferred it that way. Alex took another drag, flicking ash from his cig and exhaling the fire he let swell in his lungs. He died here. The Chinese didn't kill him, they just lured us into a trap. So this is about revenge then? Tyrese pressed. You sound just like I did when I spoke to Jack. Always questioning, always wondering, always looking for a way to get a step ahead to prove the old man was wrong. Why is that? Alex replied. You claim you want to protect New Purgatory. The same people you've gathered for that goal are going to die outside the city. I can't argue in a way that'll make you understand, Tyrese. I can only ask that you follow me, watch me, then judge me based on what I've done. Then it'll be made clear. Clearer than you want. Revenge is a byproduct of what's going to happen here today, as is the freedom of Talia's people. At the end of it all, this will help New Purgatory. Tyrese shook his head. He wanted to trust Alex. He felt like he needed to trust him. But the man talked like he had no loyalty to his new team. He made decisions without consultation and always had an answer for every dissent. Yet Tyrese still admired him, his vision and his goals. Agreeing with the way he went about it no longer mattered. Tyrese was stuck. I don't have that choice anymore, Alex. I'm here whether I like it or not. I just wish I could understand why you are the way you are. You didn't fight much during the rebellion, did you, Tyrese? I did what I could, but not like you. I was trying to keep the Marines away from people. I helped protect them. I never led strikes. And you lost people? Alex pushed. Occasionally? The hell are you getting at? When you watch your best friend cut down in the middle of a battle you think you're winning, or a mentor who breathes his last breath after being killed by a traitor, or a friend willing to give his own life in the worst conceivable way because of a mistake he made, then you can judge me. But you won't, Tyrese, and I know you won't. Because then you'll understand what the stakes of war are, what we fight for, what we give up, ensuring other people don't have to do what we did. That's why we're here. The war didn't end at the tower, that was just one battle. Beijing is just one more battle. You don't see it now, but you will. Alex tossed his cigarette, which flew off in the wind. Yeah, this team was different, and being in the lead position without a scapegoat made all the blame fall on his shoulders. That led to this outburst, this blast of emotion he needed to let go. The repercussions of that would be for another time, though. Now, Alex had to fight to remove the weight, if only to protect his home. 20 minutes out, Layla yelled out on the comm. It was all that needed to be said. The team was packed together tightly in the hold of the Hellchopper. Alex was doing his best not to rub shoulders with anyone. Just across from him, he saw Tyrese breathing in and out his nose. Talia had her eyes closed. Mikhail kept that same blank stare, and Shaylee was rapidly tapping her feet. If there was any moment to prepare his new and old friends, then this was it. Still, he had no idea if it would inspire or deflate. He didn't have the words ready, but Alex stood up anyway. Conflict. Even after so many ambushes, battles, and scrapes, the feeling before a fight stays the same. I'm looking around at you all, people I've met in the last few weeks, and I see the same fear that's working its way in my chest right now. This isn't my first team, and it won't be my last. You all are unique, new blood. You're not Crusaders. Those people are dead or forever changed by what they experienced. No, we are something new. A name I've kicked around since leaving California. Sentinels, protectors of this new world we're trying to build. We're the first line against men like John Morrison and Thomas Beruger. A shield that holds firm against any blow that would strike against it. I'll have something for you all when we get back, and we will get back. Something some of us already have. Alex reached down his shirt and pulled out his dog tags. Sentinel. The name Jack had come up with. Even now, he was helping him from beyond the grave. Helping and corrupting. They're not much. If anything, they're a reminder of why we fight and what we are fighting for. I want each of you to know that while we might not have that much experience with each other, I trust you all with my life. Let's get this done and go home. The team around him nodded. Some smiled and some checked their weapons. Minutes turned into moments.
"Here we go," Layla yelled out, and that was all the team needed. Layla was focused on the anti-air missile nearing the bird. She rolled the chopper to the right. 2 more came after, which Layla lit up with the machine guns. 3 more alarms blared on her console.
That pissed them off.
They were only a few miles from the reactor and the first fueling station. "How are we?" Alex asked as he rushed into the cockpit. Layla flung the bird around another missile and laid fire into a gun emplacement.
"That's how we are,"
she replied as she brought the bird low.
"Get ready to drop. These guys were ready for us."
"Yeah," Alex said, shaking his head. Layla saw the fueling station come into view and pushed the bird harder. Alarms were still blaring, but she forced the bird to go faster, letting the guns open wide on the ground and waiting soldiers below. The chopper neared the ground and went from high speed to nearly a dead stop. Layla dropped it to the ground and opened the rear hatch. "Out, now!" she yelled into the comm. The team escaped the bird with their weapons drawn, and Layla brought the bird back up just as more missiles were launched from afar. She tried to look behind her as the hatch closed, but saw nothing. She was alone now. It made her angry, but it was all in Alex's hands. As she made for the outskirts of Beijing, she lit up another gun emplacement and hoped her friends would succeed. Alex hefted up his rifle and began laying down fire to a nearby anti-air emplacement. His team followed him down the road toward the first fueling station. The hell chopper had drawn the attention of more than just anti-air. The familiar wail of sirens filled Alex's ears. "Vixer with me. Gates, find cover. Ground team into that shop," Alex ordered. As 3 jeeps and several scavenged police cars rolled near them, Alex and Vixer laid fire into them. While the soldiers in the jeeps and cars pulled out into open crossfire, some never made it to the door. Alex sighted down the vehicles more. "Clear," he yelled out, signaling for the team to follow him. Vixer brought up the rear as the rest of the team caught up. She walked backwards, checking the corners and alleys. She lost focus for only a moment when she looked up at a building and saw a family at the window looking down at her. Oh shit. She pulled herself back into the world when 2 more vehicles arrived from down the road. She spared a glance behind her. The team was well ahead. "Fuck," she yelled, dropping behind an old taxi for cover. Bullets were already landing at her position. When she went to glance at the vehicles again, she heard the familiar clank of metal on metal, followed by an explosion. Across the road from her was Gates, who had taken care of the soldier problem. Vixer got to her feet and fired a few rounds at the remaining soldiers, dropping them as they ran away from the fiery wreck. Gates tilted his head towards the station. Vixer picked up her stride and followed. Talia noticed that the station itself was empty. She wondered if the Chinese had even considered it a target.
"Not from foreign invaders, at least."
Mikhail guarded her flank while she looked for a hatch that led down to the tunnels. Shaylee and Tyrese took up position by the windows. Talia could hear Alex outside, yelling about using the old big-wheel trucks as cover. Finally, after rooting around a maintenance closet, did Talia find the tunnel.
"Here, I'm going in first," Talia said. "Repeat, tunnel team has found the objective."
Mikhail took a few steps back, watching his footing as Talia climbed down the hole. Tyrese was next, followed by Shaylee. The shadow waited for a few moments, and from a distance locked eyes with Alex, who had his back to the cover of the pickup. "Good luck," Mikhail said over the comm. "You too," Alex replied. Mikhail climbed down the tunnel to find his team waiting for him. Dark tunnels were exactly the types of places he was used to, but the bright light down one of the various sublets nearly blinded him. "There," Mikhail pointed. "That is where the substation is. From there we follow it to the main reactor."
"I have point," Talia said as she drew her sword.
Shaylee covered her eyes with one hand and held up a pistol with another. Mikhail moved in stride with Tyrese.
"Tunnel team, time estimation?"
Alex called out as more sirens drowned out the sound of bullets crashing into the truck they used as cover.
"Making way for the substation now, Alex. Shouldn't be too— Shit! Get down!"
Shaylee's voice cut out, but not before the sound of bullets rang out over the comm. Alex knew it was in the tunnel team's hands now. All his team could do was fight for as long as they could. He looked over at Gates and pointed to the station's roof. Vixer took one edge of the truck and Alex moved over to Gagil, who was at the other. The pit fighter had no problem holding his own with an automatic weapon. Alex motioned across the street. Gagil nodded and slung his rifle across his back. "Covering fire!" Alex yelled out. Both he and Vixer turned the corner of the semi and laid fire into all directions. Vixer's eyes were wide. She hadn't seen this many people in a combat zone since the prison riots back in New Purgatory, but the Chinese soldiers' aim was ridiculous. She almost felt guilty as she slotted one target after another. That wasn't until a bullet skimmed her waist. "Fuck!" she screamed out. Returning fire, she backed around cover again. Alex did the same and shuffled his back to the truck until he reached her. "Keeley," he said, leaning down to look at her wound. "It's a graze," she replied. "I'll be fine." "Stay down a minute," Alex replied as he caught Gates pulling back an arrow. "Let's let them have a little fun." Gajil was where he needed to be. The line of vehicles the Chinese had created were like a wall of sandbags. He reached for the long knife near his legs and sneaked near the first car. An explosion rocked the ground about 4 meters away. Gates's arrow had found another mark. Gajil smiled as the soldier's focus was directed towards the fires. He moved in and drove the makeshift metal into his first target, then ripped it from the body and spun, catching the next man across the throat. By now, 2 other soldiers were alerted to him, but Gajil hurled his blade into the skull of one and rolled away from the spray of bullets from the other. He heard the soldier yell something at him, but then heard a gurgle and the sound of a body hitting pavement. Gajil stood up and saw the arrow through the soldier's neck and shook his head, sparing a glance back towards the substation. "Yeah, you're welcome, tough guy," Gates said under his breath as he ducked back to cover. His heart was racing, but it felt good. Adrenaline was the only thing keeping him from passing out. He reached for his quiver to feel how many arrows he had left. Handful, probably 20. At this rate, he'd be throwing rocks or firing his pistol before the ground team was done, and still, he could hear more sirens approaching, this time from the opposite end of the substation. "We got a problem, Alex," he said into his comm. "I hear it, Gates. Try to slow them down." Sam looked around for anything he could shoot to close off the main road. Then he looked at the building that eclipsed the back road. Old, fragile, decrepit. He grabbed one of his explosive arrows and aimed for a balcony far above. "Long shot," he said under his breath. Gates drew the arrow back and let it go. It sailed high and far until it contacted the building. The explosion not only shattered the balcony, but part of the floor connected to it. That large piece crashed to the ground on top of a covered troop-carrying truck. It was enough to block that road for the moment, but there were still Chinese reinforcements pouring out of it. "Tell me that was a good thing," Tyrese yelled as he blind-fired down the substation hall. "God damn, I can't see shit." "Broad building down on the road," Gates said through the comm. "It's getting bad up here." Mikhail, not fazed by the light, continued to move forward, raising his pistol and firing on any Chinese soldier stupid enough to engage him. Several bullets caught him in the chest, but Mikhail never stopped. They were crushed by his armor. Talia used her sword to guard her eyes, but even she couldn't make out the fighting ahead of her. "We need masks," she yelled. "Not anymore," Mikhail said. Suddenly the light was gone. There was still the green glow from the tubes running into the main hub and back, but the reactor itself had become shielded. Tyrese moved his hand away from his eyes and rushed alongside the tubes, hurrying to set the explosives he had brought. Mikhail examined him, ensuring the man performed his handiwork correctly. He would not have a repeat incident like at Morrison's tower. "Done," Vale said, grabbing his bag and joining the rest of the team. 10 minutes and that substation is gone, Alex. We're heading for the Cloudbreaker reactor now. Just get your asses moving. You don't want to be in there when it goes up, Alex replied over the comm. And you don't want to be up there either, Vale replied. Talia led the tunnel team by following the tubes. If the blueprint was right, they would drop inside a massive underground section. The reactor was supposed to look like the substation, but far larger, with hundreds of wires and tubes that connected to the main panels above ground. Flashes of light gleamed in the distant blackened tunnels. "Get down," she yelled, jumping to cover behind a dolly that held computer parts. When she looked back, she saw the rest of her team was exposed. Talia knew she had no choice but to charge, and grenades were not an option. Talia pushed the dolly over and rushed the would-be attackers. Bullets clanged off her ceramic armor as she moved faster. One soldier screamed out as Talia closed in, her blade cutting across his throat. She ripped her sword through him and swung low at the next assailant, catching him at the shins and sending him crying to the ground. Another hail of bullets sprayed towards her. She ducked and hoped her armor would take the brunt of the attack, the vibration of rounds crashing against her back, and not the exposed area of her body confirmed that. 2 minutes, Tyrese called out over the comm. Talia was unsure if they were far enough away. What she did know was that the greater the distance, the better chances they had. She reached down for a fallen soldier's rifle and spun around, firing wildly into the darkness. She did not stop until the gun clicked repeatedly. When she looked up, she saw the muzzle flashes had stopped. Talia dropped the rifle and hoisted her blade up once more.
"Let's move," she yelled. "How much time?" Shaylee called back.
30 seconds, Alex heard Tyrese call over the comm. He had run out of time. They were surrounded. They needed a miracle now. "Gates, clear us a way out," Alex said as he looked up at the survivalist archer. Gates looked down from the fueling station's roof and replied with only a nod. He stood up straight and reached for his last 3 explosive arrows. Sam sighted down a large covered truck that was between them and the next fueling station. He let one arrow go. It caused an explosion that threw the truck and the soldiers into a nearby cafe. "Run!" Gates yelled as he pulled back one of his other arrows. Alex pushed Vixer forward and out into the open, but her attention was on Gates, who hadn't yet left the roof. Gagil had already made his way down the road to the next fueling station. The old one was hard to see between the smoke and distance. His arms were coated in blood, dripping as he blind fired around cover. Vixer's eyes were locked with Sam's, until finally he slung his bow around his neck and reached for his sidearm. Gates fired into the Chinese who rushed the front of the station. With moments to spare, Gates ran from the front of the roof to the rear, jumping hard towards the ground. Alex pulled Vixer into a building only meters away from the fueling station and followed her in. Then it exploded. Alex and Vixer covered their heads from the debris rushing at them. The ground below them rumbled, and the smoke made it hard to breathe. When Vixer was finally able to look up, she saw that the station and the Chinese were gone, along with Sam. "Gates," she said, staring into the debris. Alex didn't say a word. He reached into his coat for another clip and loaded it into his rifle. He spotted Gagil up the road and grabbed Keeley. She fell in with him and tried to focus back on the battle. They caught up to the pit fighter, who hadn't bothered to clean the drying blood on his arms. Alex could tell Vixer was dazed. She had lost men before, but never one that close to her. For a few moments she was quiet. The soldiers behind them were stopped by the explosion and quake that hit the road. And ahead, the Chinese were regrouping and taking in what they had just seen. The team hid behind an alleyway. Alex took the opportunity to get in contact with the other team. "Tunnel, you make it through?" "Just barely," Talia replied. "We're nearing the reactor. Defense is light." "I'll have Layla move in and clear out AD towers," Alex replied. "Are you all right, Alexander?" Mikhail asked. "You sound wounded." Alex shook his head. Vixer understood now that he bottled it all up. If he showed his emotions, then his leadership and strength would fall apart. "Gates didn't make it out in time." Vixer watched as Alex bit his lip after he said that. Tunnel team didn't reply. "We keep moving," Alex said. "Layla, sweep the ruins and see if..." He stopped himself. He knew Gates was gone. Another friend dead on foreign ground. "Clear the AD towers near the reactor." "I understand," Layla replied. Alex could hear the pain in her voice too. "Alex, now is not the time. We must fight on," Gagil said as he reached for his blade. "We kill as many as we can." "Yeah," Alex replied as he pulled the rack back on his rifle. "We do." Mikhail had difficulty understanding loss. He had not known Gates for long, yet Alex seemed to trust him. He wondered why the feelings for the man did not simply evaporate into the void just like the man himself. "Hey, you awake?" Tyrese said as they neared a door. Mikhail did not realize he slipped into his thoughts. He wondered if the lack of emotion made him a monster, or if he had been a monster before that. "I am here," the shadow replied, lifting his pistol in one hand and knife in the other. Talia put her hand on the door and spun the wheel that locked it into place. A green hue filled their vision, but it was not as oppressive as the substation was. It was a grand sight. A massive green globe the size of an old-world stadium filled the center of the reactor, and though it was shielded, it still seemed so fragile. "So this is what saved the fucking world," Shaylee said as she took in the superstructure. "Come on, Shaylee, let's go," Tyrese said as he moved forward. There were scientists, or at least men dressed in white coats, wandering around. Mikhail assumed they were monitoring the reactor from the computers in front of them. The database was feeding him all kinds of readouts on the power output, how long it would take to power the shield, and the solar input from the previous 5 days. Translating it all was a simple matter of paying attention. He forced himself to focus on Talia and her movements as she stalked ahead of him. The scientists, so preoccupied with their work, did not seem to notice or care.
They believe us to be mercenaries working for the Chinese.
Mikhail decided focusing on Talia was better. Yet he could not understand why. Was he entranced by her beauty? Why? He knew he could not be. Then, as they neared the main system controller, he felt the same urge that compelled him to murder Captain Carver and her men back at Severnaya. The feeling was intense. He felt a pounding in his brain and chest. The only way he could make it stop was by lifting his arm and reaching for his gun.
No, not again. I would not do that.
Mikhail, are you all right? Talia had stopped and turned to him. All he needed to see was the deadness in her eyes. The fire had left her iris. All that was left was sadness, pain, and lies.
She is already dead.
He felt like the database was telling him that. It was not a thought of his own. Perhaps he was losing control, but the urge faded away, and Mikhail regained control of his body. That did not stop him from wondering what the hell was going on.
I am fine. Let us continue.
Alex let Vixer lead the charge against the next fueling station. She stood exposed, but he knew better than to tell her any different. Alex sat behind cover, trying to take bullets he had found near the corpses of Chinese soldiers and fit them into his old clips.
We're in the shit now.
He only counted 8 or 9 rounds before he popped the clip back into the rifle and turned from the cover of an old pickup. Alex sighted down 2 exposed targets and fired 1 shot into the sternum and throat. He waved for Vixer to move closer to the station. Keeley charged ahead against the bullets rushing past her. She only stopped once her back was to one of the fueling pumps.
Smart, Keeley, she thought to herself. Do you want to end up like Sam?
She hesitated to glance at the building itself. The Chinese had blown out the windows and were using the walls as cover. Keeley knew this had to have been more than just a gas station before it was converted to a substation.
Plaster over metal,
she said to herself as she ejected her clip and put it in her bandolier. She reached for another, armor-piercing rounds, and popped it in her rifle. The Chinese had stopped firing on her and instead focused on Alex and Gajil, who were fighting their way to the pumps. Vixer rounded the corner of the fuel pump and fired below the window seals. She heard soldiers screaming out in pain as she fired round after round. Keeley didn't stop until there was a patterned bullet design embedded under each window. Vixer walked slowly into the entrance. Bodies greeted her. Bodies and pools of blood. She bent down to scavenge their ammo when she looked at one of their faces. Young, no wrinkles, and covered in dust and blood.
Shit. He's just a kid.
Alex and Gajil caught up a few moments later. Both were breathing heavily as they fell behind the unpierced walls.
Alex, they're just kids,
Keeley repeated. Alex expected killing children to be the furthest worry on the mind of an ex-Morrison Marine, but he knew better than to challenge her on that right now.
Kids or not, look at what they did to Gates,
Alex replied between huffs of polluted oxygen. Vixer was quiet after that. She knew he was right, so she tossed him a few clips. For a moment it seemed they had bought some peace.
Ground team reached the reactor. All we have to do is hold out and hope Layla clears the gun emplacements,
Alex said. Vixer nodded, but while she tried to breathe, her mind still moved as fast as the bullet she fired.
Stay alive.
Layla circled around the reactor again, tearing up each slow gun emplacement each time she passed. The new bird had too much power for the missiles to keep up.
The gun emplacements are clear, Tunnel. Call me when you're done.
Copy that. We're fitting the explosives in the computer system now, Shaylee replied. Layla had a few minutes. She decided to make for the crater to see if the Chinese were moving to flank the ground team. It was hard for her to see. The smoke was still thick in the air, and there was radiation pouring out into the atmosphere, according to the onboard Geiger counter. Layla brought the bird low.
Nothing here except dead Chinese and ruined road.
That was until she saw a single body, alone and apart from the rest.
God damn,
Layla said to herself as she let the bird touch the ground.
It can't be.
Beruger threw his hands on his desk. It was all falling apart, and his options were running out. His computer system had failed yet again. The domination he wished to establish had become impossibility. He wheeled his chair over to his phone system on another desk just behind him. He pressed a few buttons and picked up the receiver. After a few more moments of waiting, the line answered.
Set the fallback plan to go,
Beruger said, and then hung up. This was not how he imagined China playing out. He had forewarned them, and now he would pay the price of his own arrogance and pride. The folly of the old world was haunting him, all because of the street kids from New Purgatory and beyond. He hated them. He wanted to tear out their throats with his teeth and fingernails. Yet here he was, sitting in an uncomfortable office chair, stretched out and watching Alexander Velasco tear apart his legacy, a brick at a time. This new world he strove to build. It could not fall apart like this. Certainly he had pushed the bounds of science, be it with humanity, energy, or weapons. But he believed he had created a better world. He gave those that needed help the tools to have a better life, and left those that created the new world behind. Now it all came toppling over. First New Purgatory, now Beijing. He wondered how long it would be until they were at his own gates, ready to destroy the utopia he had created. He could not allow that to happen, not to his people, and not to the legacy he was making for himself. He had remade the world.
No,
he said to himself as he moved to one of his computer monitors. He could see his backup plan moving into position.
He will not fail me. He owes me too much.
Mikhail did all that was in his power to hack into the main terminal. The database was contending with algorithms that were outpacing his mind. There were too many different encryption schemes, all leading back to the same route and blocking him every time. The Shadow watched as Tyrese placed sticker bombs on the pipes. They might have been enough to destabilize the reactor, but it wouldn't melt down the core or make it explode. There were too many backups, too many other lines. The blueprint was clear in his mind. Mikhail tried focusing back on the computer when he heard gunshots ring out across the reactor.
Shit,
Tyrese yelled as he ducked below the railing.
Are you fucking insane?
Mikhail diverted his attention and shifted his vision. It was one man. A man coated in tattoos and wielding both a sword and a gun.
Takeo,
Talia screamed out as she rushed him. The Yakuza met her blade for blade. The green light gleamed off their polished swords. Shayley knew then he was an agent of the Chinese the entire time. He had known they were coming, and he had warned Talia's enemies.
Shayley, help Tyrese finish setting the explosives, then clear a path for the roof, Mikhail ordered.
But what about Talia?
You will only get in her way. Go, now.
Talia swung low at Takeo, but he matched her every maneuver. He let her take the offensive with every strike.
Why?
Talia yelled out as she struck out at Takeo again.
This was not our war. It never was,
Takeo explained as he parried Talia's blow.
Japanese born in China. We've forgotten what it means to be our own people. We fight because of your father's petty need for revenge.
Talia swung hard again, catching the hilt of Takeo's blade and going for his wrist. The man jumped back a pace and struck out with his own flurry of attacks.
We are going back,
Talia hollered as she blocked attack after attack. One made it through and slammed into her armor. The pain was negligible, but she felt the vibration through her body. She knew that if she didn't have her armor, she would be maimed or dead. They both knew it. Talia took a few more steps back and cast off her robes. Then she reached for the side seam that held together her armor. She pulled a tab on one, then another. The plates that lined her from chest to shin came off, leaving only the skin suit she wore beneath it. Talia brought her blade back up and pointed it towards Takeo. The Yakuza flashed a greedy grin and went for another attack. Mikhail was fighting a losing battle. He stopped typing at the keys and instead placed a hand down on the massive computer system itself. He could feel the electricity running through his body. The database was taking hold of the system, corrupting it as it had once corrupted him. The screams of his old life went by as he kept his hand pinned down.
Why are these memories coming back now?
The connection broke almost as fast as it had been created. When Mikhail looked back at the computer screen, he saw that the database had worked. He was in. He put aside his musings and looked for the cooling control. In a matter of moments, he had configured it for meltdown and self-destruct. Even if the debris were cleared, no one would be building in Beijing for a long time. He looked at Talia. She was still engaged with the Yakuza. Mikhail shouted out her name, but Talia did not look away from her assailant. Instead, he watched her reach around her neck for her dog tags. She ripped them away and tossed them hard back towards the shadow. Mikhail ran for them and snatched them out of the air. He waited for a few seconds, watching the back and forth between the two.
Dahlia,
he said quietly into his comm.
Go, Mikhail. I'll be fine,
she replied. The sound of steel clashing with steel was the bookend of their conversation. Mikhail turned away and ran for the stairs to the roof.
She will not be okay.
She will die. As he climbed each flight of stairs, he wondered why humans lied to the ones they cared about the most.
Tunnel needs extraction, now.
Alex listened to Shaylee's voice over the comm. They succeeded. That was all that mattered.
Ground team, you have 20 minutes before this place goes up in smoke,
Tyrese added. Get yourself on the bird and make it this way. We'll hold out until then, Alex said, though he knew he was lying. The Chinese didn't seem to care that they were firing on their own substation now. A well-placed round could have blown them all to hell. Alex looked at Vixer and Gagio. We need to clear a landing zone. He could see Vixer's wound was getting worse as she moved, but she nodded at him just the same. Gagio flashed a bloody smile. He was ready for more war. The pit fighter was the first to stand and ran out the door, shouting in his native language. Alex stood up and reached down to help Vixer up, but she slapped his hand away. Keeley pushed herself up and looked at Alex.
For Sam,
she said, loading another clip into her rifle.
Yeah,
Alex replied as he put his back to cover. The two lifted their rifles and fired into the vehicles the Chinese used as cover. It sent the would-be soldiers scurrying for better positioning. Alex used the time to run for one of the fuel pumps and threw his back to it. Vixer mirrored him. Gagio stayed in the open, running for a troop transport. Alex knew the man was nuts, but not like this. He was feral, and had not seen the soldiers flanking him to the side. Several bullets crashed into the pit fighter's chest and legs. That did not stop Gagio. Instead, he went for a short blade and stabbed it into the face of the closest soldier. More bullets came his way, but he used the body as a shield until he could no longer sustain the weight of his own body. Gagio crashed to the ground. Blood poured from his wounds as the Chinese came to surround him. Alex was captivated as he watched. He lifted his rifle, then saw the pit fighter's arm come up. There was something hand-fashioned in it. It was like a grenade, but made from metal and sharpened.
Thank you, Gates,
Alex heard faintly in the ear from his comm. Then an explosion. It knocked he and Vixer to the ground. Alex fell hard on his back and struggled to look up. Another crater had replaced where the soldiers, and Gagio, had been. Alex felt his body failing him as he tried to use his rifle to stand back up. His body was sore and scraped, and his mind was scarred by what he had witnessed.
Not one more,
he said as his world went black. Layla brought the hell chopper down on top of the reactor. Tyrese, Shaylee, and Mikhail boarded, but Layla looked back.
Wait, where the hell is Talia?
She asked aloud.
Layla, we must go,
Mikhail stated. For a moment, Layla thought he almost sounded somber. She didn't repeat her question. She sighed and slammed her hands down on the control console. Another friend dead. It was like Morrison's tower all over again.
Who the hell is this?
Shaylee asked as she leaned down and pulled a blanket away from the body lying across the seats in the hold.
Oh, shit.
Shaylee had answered her own question. She reached for her bag and began scrubbing away rock and metal that had been lodged into the man's skin.
Jesus Christ. Cates. Tyrese, come here and put some pressure on that wound. Mikhail, give me a basic assessment.
Vixer dragged Alex back into the building that housed the substation. Bullet fire was starting in on them again, and her rifle was dry. So was Alex's. She wasn't going to die like this, not after all the sacrifice that had taken place today. She reached for her bandolier. All that was left was a few grenades. She pulled the pin from one and tossed it out a window and towards a truck. The explosion sent debris and rock spraying in all directions. This is it. We're going to end up dead in a gas station in China. The thoughts of doubt left her when she heard the rattling chain gun fire outside and the rumble of engines. Fucking hell, she said to herself, grabbing Alex by the shoulders and hauling him outside. Mikhail and Tyrese were waiting for her, firing weapons at any Chinese stupid enough to walk into their line of fire. Tyrese holstered his gun and helped Keeley pull Alex up the ramp. Mikhail followed. Layla closed off the ramp and hit the sky. Vixer let Alex go as soon as she saw Gates laying in the hold. His legs were cooked, and his body had wounds up and down from shrapnel and rock. She moved over to him and started helping Ferris clean his wounds with carbolic soap. Vixer looked up at Shaylee for a time. Shaylee looked back and shook her head. I can handle this, Shaylee said. Go on. Vixer moved over to Gates's head. He had one arm outstretched. She took it. She was surprised when he grasped her hand first. Remember that time you tried to get me killed? He said. Keeley let out a small laugh that came out as a whine and gripped Gates's hand tight. Alex finally started coming around out of the darkness. He wasn't sure where he was at first. The hold of a hell chopper was the last place he expected to be. He saw Gates in front of him, with Keeley trying to talk to him. Even weary and wounded, he saw that one of their number was missing. He reached over to the first person's leg he could grab. It was Mikhail's. Where's Talia? The shadow tilted his head down at Alex, then looked back out the viewport towards Beijing. Talia had taken a few cuts, but so had Takeo. Losing her armor gave her the free feeling of being part of the sword again. No longer did she swing the blade with full force. She let each strike flow from one to another. Takeo looked worn down, but Talia had focused on keeping her breathing even. Her Yakuza counterpart had partaken in one too many nights of drinking. Then Talia noticed the green glow of the reactor growing ever brighter. She wouldn't get to see the future Alex had laid out for her, or the new home he had convinced her father to build. Somehow, she had always known that she wouldn't. She was not meant to survive this war. Perhaps that was what she had learned when faith was stripped away. Talia raised her sword and drove it towards Takeo's chest. He wasn't fast enough this time. The sword pierced his chest. Talia pushed it in harder and twisted the blade. Takeo tried to spit blood at her, but instead it drooled out through his teeth. Talia ripped the blade out. Blood sprayed across the walls and onto the reactor. Takeo fell to his knees, and his eyes rolled behind his head. When he hit the ground, Talia let out a long exhale. She had no words as she watched life drain out of him, and then she turned towards the green light, embracing it. The armor around the reactor began to rescind. The green globule was difficult to stare into. She could feel it burning away at her eyes, but she no longer cared. The experiences she had with the Crusaders now felt cruel, because she knew at this moment she should have felt fulfilled by the trappings of her old life. But there was only sadness at the life she would leave behind. I hope you are proud of me now, Father. Alex didn't stop staring out the viewport until the explosion forced him to look away. He put his head down between his knees. When he looked up, he saw that they were wet stains where the dirt had been on his fatigues. Talia was gone. She had stayed with Janet all those months ago and had come back for him and Layla in the tower. But Alex had left her behind. Now she was dead, and it was his fault. Alex lifted his head back up and looked out at the viewport. There was a large mushroom cloud that he could see from miles and miles away. It was thick as it rose, polluting the air and turning the rising sun over China sanguine red. Vixer stood over Gates. He was breathing hard, but of all the body parts that were scarred by the battle, his face was intact. Vixer was running her hands through his hair. It was finally over. The Chinese and all of Beijing were gone. They could head back to New Purgatory. We're going home, Sam. I'll be able to take care of you there, she said. Gates groaned as he turned his head towards her. She could feel his heart pounding out of his chest. Not for me, Keeley, he said, strained. Ferris had given up on scrubbing him down. There was too much to clean, and not enough materials for her to stitch with. In the back of her head, Keeley knew Gates was right. He wasn't making it back to New Purgatory. This was the only time he had left. He spent the few moments he had, gripping her hand.
Shaylee, what the hell is wrong with his chest? Vixer asked. A heart condition. He's had it for years. The added stress of injuries isn't helping. If I do any more... She left the words unsaid. Shaylee had an old expression on her face, the same one that came with saving so many people, only to watch them die later. Now she could add Gates to that list. Vixer leaned onto Gates's chest, just above his heart. Gates lifted his mutilated hand and placed it on her head, brushing back her hair. I'm sorry, he said as evenly as he could. Vixer kept her head on his chest for the entire flight back to Tianjin. She never stopped, even when she could feel his heartbeat no longer. When the bird landed in Tianjin, everybody got off as quickly as they could, save for Alex, who moved over to Keeley. She was still lying with Gates, even though it was clear he was gone. I didn't even thank him. Time with the last person you loved was all you could ask for. But Vixer, she would be hurting for a long time, just like Nyala did for Jack, just like Janet for Elias. He put a hand on her back as he walked by and down the ramp. Layla caught up with him. Alex didn't look at her, but she could see how welled up his eyes were. The flight had been abnormally silent, and every second felt like an hour. Everyone was wounded, and their minds were worn. Tyrese didn't draw, Shaylee didn't talk. Vixer looked after a dead man, and Mikhail did nothing at all. It wasn't who they were. Once again, pain had brought change. Alex, Layla started to say. He held up his hand. Not yet. I need to tell her father. Don't let anybody get too comfortable. We're going home tonight. Alex moved past her, leaving his team behind and crawling down the shaft to the hangar. Layla shook her head. She felt alone. She walked up the ramp. Alex had left his journal on his chair along with the pen. She didn't understand why he left it out like this. He never did that unless they were home. She opened it and flipped through the pages. There were passages from back in California, New Purgatory, Egypt, Russia, and now here. There was nothing new after that. Layla turned to a clean page and signed her name at the top as she had always done for her own entries, and began to write. Alex found himself in Tondori's office. His body wanted a bed to lie on. His skin wanted to wash away the dirt and grime. His feet wanted to be out of their boots. But here he stood in the late day. Tondori sat in a chair sipping from a glass. He said nothing. I assume you saw the explosion from here, Alex said wearily. Tondori stood up and reached for another glass, then filled it with a pitcher of water. He strode over to Alex and handed it to him. Alex took a long sip and then set it on the table where they had planned the battle on. Yes, Alexander, we did. Is there a reason you didn't bring your team down? You realize this is cause for celebration, I hope. There was a stinging feeling in Alex's chest. He winced, then shook his head. No, Tondori, it isn't. I just lost 2 people down there, and another on the flight back because of his wounds. I'm sorry, Alexander, but they died as heroes. What you did for us... Alex held up his hand and stopped him. Tondori, I lost your daughter. Talia is dead. Tondori froze as he brought up his cup for another drink. Alex didn't have anything else to say to him, but he forced himself to remain calm. He needed to see the older man's reaction, to feel his pain. Talia. Oh, Talia. Alex couldn't help himself. He had to look away. The pain was too much, so he tried to switch subjects. Your war is over. Now I need you to set things in motion to move your people. You need to go home. The elder Shazari shook his head. His blood feud with the Chinese was ended, but it had cost him his daughter. It's what she would have wanted, Alex pressed. How do you know that? I raised her. I was her father. How do you know better than I do? Tondori yelled. You weren't her father. You used her as a tool. You must have seen it, Ton.
That lack of energy, the fire burnt out of her eyes. It wasn't just from her fighting with us, it was the realization there's more to life than old hatreds. Yeah, she accomplished the goal you set out for. Your enemies are all dead now, and all it cost you was the life of your child. The home you taught her to fight for was more important to her than the blood you spilled here. Do you understand now what I told you before? Tandori was silent. Alex expected the man to yell back, but instead he looked down. Tears were slowly coming down his cheeks. Take your people home, Tandori, Alex said. It will take time, at least a year. And the fallout from the bomb we just made will kill you all in less than that, Alex replied. You just lost your daughter. Don't lose your fucking colony because you're stubborn. Find someone capable and have them sent to Jerusalem. Your people will need an ambassador. They'll meet with mine. Tandori shrugged his arms. Alex felt bad for pouring more shit on top of the man, but he didn't want to stay in this country another goddamn day. When? Tandori asked. Give it a month for the council to find out what happened here. The council knows about your war, but they won't suspect your people or mine. They're going to think it was an accident. The Chinese overextended their grasp on Cloudbreaker and failed. That gives you time to get your people home. Alex turned around to leave. Alex, wait, Tandori said as he moved over to his desk and leaned down in front of it. When he stood back up, he held a sword in both hands. Talia told me you had a collection. You should add this to it. I meant to give it to my daughter when she returned. It belonged to her mother. Tandori set the blade down carefully on the table. Alex looked down at this finely polished blade, engraved with letters he didn't understand, sheathed in white, coated by designs of lilies and cherry blossoms. Alex's eyes narrowed. Then he looked up at Talia's father. I only take blades from the people I've killed, Tandori. You should do the same. Alex turned around and went out the door, leaving Tandori and his dead feud behind. Mikhail stared down at Talia's dog tags for what seemed like hours, even though the database reminded him it had only been a few minutes. Doubt. Why did I want to kill her? Why did I not help her? She was not dead, not yet. He clutched the metal between his fingers. He didn't understand. He wondered if he ever would. For the first time since Sebanaya, he sat down and let his thoughts carry him away from the database. Tyrese moved over to him, but before he could speak, Mikhail held out the tags. Tyrese was the memory keeper, and if anyone deserved to be remembered, it was Talia. The debt was paid to both the Japanese and Talia's past. Mikhail thought what Gagio would say. He was a man that believed the path was determined by reactions. Mikhail wanted to know if in that final moment of his life, he had chosen to pull the pin on the grenade, knowing it had to be done to save Alex and Vixer. The shadow shut his mind off to the rest of the world. Now was not the time to remember the team this way. He would rest, and he would move on, just as all the times he had done before. Alex made his way back to the birds, a cigarette hanging from his mouth. What was left of his team surrounded him. Mikhail, take the old bird and everyone else. Get Gates in a body bag and we'll bury him when we get home. What about you? Tyrese asked. I'm going where we're all headed. Back to New Purgatory. I just want to spend some time alone with Layla. Get my head straight. It's better for you guys to take the bigger chopper. You'll have beds in that one. It will be done, Alexander, Mikhail said as he made for the bird. Ferris, Vale, and Vixer followed. Their heads were down. They had achieved victory, but it was hollow. Alex tossed his cigarette to the ground and smashed it under the heel of his torn-up boots, and then looked up at Layla. She gave him a teary half-smile and embraced him. The sun was beginning to set now, but their night was far from over. You did everything you could, love, she whispered in his ear. I know. I just wish I could have done more, he replied. Layla turned her head to his neck. Her eyes were wet, but so were his. Too much. It was all too much. They held each other tight, as if it was the only thing that mattered. It was. Let's go home, Alex finally whispered. So they did.